Back alongside Craig Button. All right, Craig, the Pens haven't won the Cup since 2017. Presumably, Sidney Crosby is going to play out the rest of his NHL career in a Pittsburgh Penguin uniform. We know Crosby is not ever going to say he's just playing out the string. But let me ask you a question. Knowing what you know about him, what he's got left in his game, what this organization has from top to bottom, could we see Sidney Crosby contend for the Cup again or not?
I don't see it in the near future in Pittsburgh. Now, obviously, we see rosters change over time, and certainly a reinforcement or strengthening of the roster could give them that opportunity. Listen, Sidney Crosby is wired to compete and to compete for Stanley Cups. But there also becomes a reality with respect to, okay, what does the team look like? How is the team constructed? And certainly it's an aging team. It's an older team. Kyle Dubas is trying to add some youth to that group. But when you look at the competition, and I'm just going to look in the Eastern Conference, I don't see the Pittsburgh Penguins as any type of Stanley Cup contender when I look at their current roster. So what could it look like in the future? I don't know. I think those conversations with Sidney Crosby are ones that have been going on to help him understand what they're trying to do. Because the DNA in Sidney is all about competing at the highest level. He's an elite player. He hasn't dropped off in his play, and certainly he wants to be that difference maker and is a difference maker. But the team doesn't afford him right now the opportunity to compete for a Stanley Cup. In fact, Gino, I'm not so sure that the team affords him the opportunity to be in the playoffs. They'll be competing for a playoff spot, but being in the playoffs is the immediate goal. Stanley Cup contending right now, not, in my view, realistic.
Okay, you've been a GM in this league. You've had to turn organizations around. We've seen it before where teams have to bottom out. Back-to-back years of missing the playoffs for Sidney Crosby, the first time that's ever happened in his career. How long, realistically, will it take to turn this ship around? How quickly can Kyle Dubas turn this back into a contender? At least for a playoff spot, seriously.
Well, I mean, I think they're close to contending for a playoff spot. They did last year. They fell a little bit short. I think they can be right there contending for a playoff spot. Certainly, the goaltending has to find a way to be really consistent and not get to those dips that hurt you. You look at other areas of their team, you know, the consistency. They've shown stretches in the last 2 years while falling short of the playoffs where they could play really well, but they haven't been able to extend that for longer periods of time. Kevin Hayes comes in as a third-line center. You know, what does he have left? Can he help the team be successful? You know, Brian Rust had a really good season last year. Michael Bunting came over for Jake Guentzel. He gave them a real boost. Bottom line, they're an aging team. They're not much different when you look at their roster now than you look at the Chicago Blackhawks roster in 2017. Coincidentally, the same year that the Pittsburgh Penguins won the Stanley Cup. And they were an older team. They were starting to age. They still had some productivity from their top players, but you could see where it was falling off. And when you trade picks and you're trying to position your team to be the best possible team to contend, there's going to be a price to pay somewhere down the road. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, that road is right here, right now. The price they are paying is 2 seasons consecutively out of the playoffs. So how do you improve your team? It's really, really difficult when you've been so successful for so long and you have players that are just getting a little bit older and not as capable as they once were. We've seen many examples of that. I just talked about the Chicago Blackhawks. The answer is, you know, what can you do to manipulate it into your advantage? Easier said than done.
All right, Craig. So are we seeing the role of Sidney Crosby in the NHL now completely take a shift? From Sid, here's the C, lead us to cups, to Sid, you're still our captain. What we need you now to do is lead us into the future through a rebuild, which may be painful for you, but we need your leadership to get these young kids up and developed for the future, potentially for when you're gone.
Yeah, I have no question about Sidney Crosby's ability to be a leader of everybody and anybody, and to lead you in a direction that says this is what's required for success. It doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to have that success. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed to achieve the goals of winning the Stanley Cup. But to set a template about this is the way we play and this is what we have to do to be ultimately successful, nobody knows it better than Sidney Crosby. And that example will always be on display. Maybe, Gino, you look at where Sidney finds himself now, an acceptance of like, my role is a little bit different. My role is going to be such that I have to help the team transition. But I will say this, he'll be wearing the C with the maple leaf in front and trying to help Canada win gold medals, first at the Four Nations face-off and then at the 26 Olympics.
Yeah. But as a Pittsburgh Penguin, it looks like Sidney Crosby's role with that organization is shifting. It could be painful for him, and I think it's going to be painful for the fans who love to watch him at his best as well. Our director of scouting, Craig Button.